we are born in ignorance. As we grow up, we receive a fragmented picture of the facts, and each person develops their own subjective opinion of the world. Some are lucky enough to be born into a family with a deep, consistent transmission of knowledge, while others fall prey to the deceptive propaganda of the media and become talking heads promoting false narratives. The most important thing in this world is to know who you are and where you stand. When you possess these keys, you can avoid most of the false paths that deepen ignorance. The purpose of life for a rational being is to learn positive qualities from others and to construct an objective picture of the history of humanity and the universe. This is the spiritual path. In this video, we will attempt to more holistically and structurally analyze the history of the last couple of thousand years. This will be difficult, for we will not rely on false history books. We will have only material facts at our disposal. The architecture of the old world, ancient buildings, evidence of catastrophes, and objects whose existence is simply impossible within the modern historical narrative. We must also objectively examine the sacred scriptures, without religious fanaticism. How do they relate to current events? Who is God? What is the role of religion? Who are we in this system? There is a true God, the Absolute, creator of every form of energy, all worlds, and countless species of living beings. It is impossible to imagine him. He is a quantum, multidimensional singularity. The Absolute always acts indirectly. He never interferes, and therefore free will is preserved. However, within the hierarchy of the universe, there are many spiritual beings who rise and fall in their development. The Old Testament Yahweh is one such demiurge. He is not the Absolute. Yahweh presents himself as God and misleads humanity. He cannot allow anyone to surpass him in spirituality. Otherwise, he will lose spiritual power and fall in the hierarchy. Therefore, he approaches the most spiritual individuals, introduces himself as God, and begins to inflate the human ego, calling them chosen, as he did with the nations and prophets. Furthermore, this chosen people turns up their noses and considers everyone else subhuman. The true God, the Absolute, will never talk to anyone. His personality has nothing in common with primitive human consciousness. Gospel of John 1:18. No one has ever seen God. The history in the Old Testament is deliberately written in a clumsy language that disrupts ordinary perception. This is a reprogramming of the mind, when the atrocities in each chapter are clothed in a special form, difficult for quick reading, so that a picture does not form in the mind. When we read human literature, the brain begins to hallucinate, and we see vivid images of what is happening. But the scriptures are constructed in such a way that people have difficulty reading each line. It's like neuro-linguistic programming. The critical nature of what's happening is lost. A person stops drawing correct moral conclusions from what they read. If everything were written in human language, there would be no room for doubt that the God of the Old Testament is a demon posing as the creator. As the saying goes, judge by the fruits. Over the years, the internet has accumulated thousands of hours of analysis of the Old Testament, demonstrating that Yahweh is the demiurge. There's no point in going into this further, so I'll highlight the most important points. The true God acts indirectly. Direct intervention is the most severe psychological violence against the individual and a violation of free will. A person becomes a slave, their true self suppressed. It's as if your mother led you everywhere by the hand your whole life, never letting go. There's even a popular expression, to stand over your soul. Direct orders from God violate free will, and this contradicts the act of creation of a free soul. Moreover, Yahweh himself says, Isaiah 45:7, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. If he does evil, this relieves everyone of responsibility for what is happening. What is the personality of Yahweh in the Old Testament? He is an egocentric tyrant, obsessed with a thirst for power. He grants special powers to the chosen ones, commands them to kill their children, mutilate their genitals, conquer other peoples, and convert them to his faith, and exterminate the disobedient, and enslave them. He forces them to build altars for slaughtering animals, eats the meat, and enjoys the smoke of the flesh burning on the altar. In the Old Testament, the chosen individuals are portrayed as fanatical dictators without a sense of humor. There are no moments when humor relieves tension. Whenever someone stumbles over the slightest provocation, they are immediately cursed on. This, according to the Vedas, is a trait of demons, for their egocentric nature is capable only of cursing. Examples are on every page. Noah got drunk. Ham saw him and laughed. But Noah, in his pride, curses not Ham, but his grandson and his entire family. Any saint from the Vedas would have sent Ham on a month-long pilgrimage to holy places, so that his mind would clear and he would receive blessings. But we see in the Bible only curses rained down on everyone, both from God and from his chosen ones, because that's the egocentric nature of demons. Look at the blessings Yahweh bestowed. He promised a promised land, and how Moses ultimately received it. Look at the horrific contracts they make with Yahweh, cutting off the foreskins of boys. Is this how God, the creator of all things, acts, or could only a demon act? There are also revealing moments in the book of Enoch. Yahweh allows observers onto earth. Why would the all-seeing creator need intermediaries? These observers, fallen angels, have intercourse with earthly women and give birth to Nephilim. Then these super beings supposedly corrupt people, and it all comes down to Yahweh bringing a flood upon everyone. But here are the nuances in this story. Yahweh himself allows angels onto earth, and the birth of the Nephilim. I imagine God could have come up with 1,000 ways to prevent such an outcome. Even the simple impossibility of fertilization would have solved the problem. However, to prevent the Nephilim from escaping the flood, the angels were ordered to cut down those very same giant trees, now considered mountains, the famous Devil's Mountain in America. Naturally, these trees played some important role in the earthly system, and he needed a reason to destroy them. Therefore, Yahweh carried out a two-in-one plan, destroying important elements of the cosmos and nullifying all accumulated human knowledge, interrupting the transmission of information between generations about the previous world. Children, a maniac has settled in your house. I will have to blow up your house along with you. Here, I repeat, Yahweh and the prophets cannot be mixed together. Prophets and saints are people of high spirituality. Yahweh uses them to manipulate history, ensuring that no one can dethrone him. Therefore, the prophets foretold the appearance of Christ, whose spiritual essence surpassed Yahweh. The demiurge, in turn, also tried to influence Christ, posing as his father and attempting to manipulate him through his ego. But despite Yahweh's pressure, the Sermon on the Mount is directly directed against the Old Testament. Turn the other cheek instead of an eye for an eye. And key passages help us understand who Yahweh is. Christ never once addresses Yahweh by name in the Gospels. John 1:18. No one has ever seen God. John 8:40. For you are of your father, the devil, and the lusts of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not abide in the truth, because there is no truth in him. Also noteworthy is the phrase about the prince of this world, that he is condemned. Who is the prince of this world if not Yahweh? After all, he led God's chosen people and gave laws. The question arises, who is Christ? One book cannot fully reveal the entire truth of the universe. That's why I studied many esoteric theories, especially Eastern ones. Hinduism largely reflects what's happening, where there are successive demiurges ruling this world. They are all egocentric individuals. And then there are saints who descend into this world to restore order. Christ is one of the saints who came to clean out Avadiv's stables here. But like the others, he was born in ignorance, and the demiurge introduced himself to him as his father. In the New Testament, we can see that Jesus isn't omniscient. He asks questions, not rhetorical ones, and is surprised by people's actions. His last phrase on the cross is also revealing. Father, why have you forsaken me? Let's revisit the ingrained term, lamb. Is it associated with Christ? How long has it appeared in the Old Testament? In what context is it used in the New Testament? Essentially, a lamb is simply a ram slaughtered for a feast. Why do people perceive lamb in a positive connotation? Is it because their brains have been rewired by a clunky text? Did Yahweh program Christ to be his sacrificial offering? The role of the lamb in the Old Testament is bloody and specific. The lamb first appears as a sacrifice offered to Yahweh in the sacrifice of Abel, which pleased God more than the offering of his brother Cain. From that moment on, it became one of the main sacrificial animals for the chosen people. The most important context is the sacrifice during the Jewish holiday of Passover. On the night of the Exodus from Egypt, each Jewish family was commanded to slaughter a 1-year-old, unblemished lamb and smear its blood on the doorframes of their homes. According to the text, this was to save their firstborn from the destroying angel who was killing all Egyptian infants that night. So, in essence, the Passover lamb is a ritually slaughtered animal whose blood served as a marker to delay death. Need we explain here that Yahweh sanctions such atrocities, and angels obediently carry out his every will? Thus, in the Old Testament, the lamb is an object, a ritual instrument for appeasing a fearsome deity, and not at all a subject to be evoked. John the Baptist publicly calls Christ the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. John 1:29. This moment is crucial. From this moment on, Jesus is no longer simply a man or a teacher. He is a predestined sacrifice. His entire mission boils down to one thing: to be slaughtered. The logic of the ritual is simple. Just as in Egypt, the blood of an innocent lamb saved the chosen Jews, so Yahweh extends his powers with the ritual blood of a highly spiritual figure. As you know, there are 33 Freemasons. The Demiurge's plan was accomplished. He is the master of this world. He ruled the Roman Empire and fashioned a system of slavery. He orchestrated the death of Christ at age 33. But Jesus was able to return to this world thanks to spiritual power, transformed by Yahweh's influence. Jesus bound the dummy Satan for 1,000 years, and here began the millennial kingdom, now called Tartary. Most people, upon learning about conspiracy theories, ask, why would they lie? What's the point? And it makes sense if we live in the little season of Satan from the Apocalypse, chapter 20. Revelation 22, 1-5. And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key of the abyss, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, that old serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the abyss, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be loosed for a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, nor his image, neither had received his mark on their foreheads, or on their hands. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not come to life again, until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. During his lifetime, Jesus spoke not to distant generations, thousands of years later, but to his disciples and fellow tribesmen who surrounded him. Matthew 16:28. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Either those present at this speech are still alive, or the kingdom has come in their lifetime. Everything described in the Bible has already happened. Nero's name in Gematria is 606. John was imprisoned on the island of Patmos and wrote warnings of coming events in Ethiopian language. The horsemen of the apocalypse are the Roman tetrarchy, a form of government with 4 rulers. Revelation 1-9. I, John, your brother and companion, in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation 1-7. Behold, he comes with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall woe because of him. Even so, Amen. Those who accepted Christ understood perfectly well what he was writing about. They expected Christ in their lifetime. John writes specifically that those who pierced him will see Christ in woe. All the meaningless vanity of modern life is deliberately designed so that people have no time to stop and reflect on the world around them. And yet all this is right under our noses. You may have seen the beautiful buildings in Rome and the Vatican and thought that they were only a few. However, on all continents of the earth, there are tens of thousands of temples and palaces of insane complexity and geometry, which could not have been built by peasants in bast shoes, without electricity and modern tools. Satan's deception of the little season would have been impossible if everyone knew that all this was built under Christ by the efforts of the saints. Here is a brief chronology of the known events of the new era. Year 0. Birth of Christ. Year 33. Crucifixion and Ascension of Christ. Year 66. Armageddon. A third of the earth is destroyed. Deserts, cities and mountains melted. The beginning of the millennial kingdom, which is called Tartary. Peasants in bast shoes, without electricity and tools, did not build these thousands of palaces and cathedrals across the earth. This was done by Shins. The buildings have no baths or toilets. Coins and buildings are dated with the letters J and I before the date. For example, J758. This is not a unit. It is a designation of the millennial kingdom. Everything is described in the already mentioned verses of the Gospel. Revelation 1-7, Matthew 16:28, Revelation 22:1-5. The Roman triumphal arches were made in honor of Christ. They have angels that are not in the Roman tradition. This is not Victoria. The angels have male faces. The first arch was made in 80 AD, after Armageddon. In ancient paintings, the texts on the arches glorify Christ. (1066), beginning of the lesser season of Satan, from the Gospel chapter 20. The continents on the flat earth move apart, a mud flood occurs, most perish. The sun begins to move in 2 orbits, along the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. Previously, the continents were closer together, and it was summer everywhere. In medieval paintings until the 16th century, there is no winter. The rewriting of history begins. The Masons renamed 1066 to 1666. Historian Gunnar Hansen, who was not a Christian, conducted research and proved that 600 years of history were false. 1176, 1776. The USA was founded and the history of Rome was written by the Freemason Gibbon. The Statue of Liberty is a statue of Satan. Look at her feet. The chains are broken. Today is the year 1426, 2026-8. The number 6 appears everywhere, in the most significant places, for a reason. I'll point out the most important thing. They have used the Babylonian system of calculation since ancient times, so they insert the numbers 6 or 9 everywhere in significant places. Whether this is due to the Nephilim having 6 fingers, or the 6-pointed star, is unknown. The entire so-called science of the universe is the number of the beast. Newton. Gravity. 1666. The tilt of the Earth is 90 degrees, minus the tilt of the Earth, 23.4, gives 66.6. The curvature of the Earth is 0.666 feet per mile. The speed of the planet behind the Sun is 66.6 thousand miles per hour. The radius of the Sun is 696,000 kilometers. The gravitational constant is 66.6. The lunar landing was in 1969. There are dozens of very significant places where they insert 666. Every barcode and QR code is the number 666. This is how they sign their names and denote their share of power. And that's why the date, 2026, is so interesting in this context. 1666 plus 360 years equals 2026, and 1776 plus 250 years equals 2026 again. 250 years is a quarter of 1,000, like a season, a little season. In English, This sounds like Satan's little season, and it's noteworthy that the number 360 is a cycle. And if you add up all the numbers from 1 to 36, you get their favorite number, 666. Many would like to know whether 2026 marks the end of the season, but don't jump to conclusions. The rabbit hole is still deep. Despite Christ's benevolent intentions, given Vedic stories, it is known that saints can also be deceived. We don't know how much Yahweh influenced him. Based on abundant evidence, it is clear that in 66 AD, Jesus returned and caused Armageddon, killing tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands. But this somehow doesn't align with the practice of turning the other cheek. And besides, there's no description of the fallen angels, the spirits of the Nephilim, whose demons Jesus himself cast out, being eliminated. Again, all the blame falls on people, as a consequence, not a cause. Before Tartary, there were Nephilim cities, Roman style, which the fallen angels borrowed from heaven. However, in Tartary, they had a special function thanks to sound geometry, like Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Milan Cathedral in Italy, and Burgos Cathedral in Spain. Their grandeur cannot be denied, but they look truly eerie. It's even difficult to relate them to human architecture. Such a Gothic colossus has an overwhelming effect on the human psyche, and this is not a subjective perception. Many people notice this. These buildings mostly evoke fear, unlike ordinary capitals, which are more associated with the unity of spirit and order, and their form is more human. I also have a complaint about the medieval paintings. I don't know if these paintings date back to the Millennium Kingdom, or if they were created by AI when the small season began. But they look, to put it mildly, extremely bastard. These days, you can go to any artist's website and be blown away by the styles. But here we're talking about the great technologies of Tartary, where people couldn't draw properly. That's strange, and no technical structures, large or small, remain. It seems that although people possessed supernatural abilities, they did so within a kind of bastard state. It seems like a kind of Soviet Union, where everyone walked in fear of God and didn't dare contemplate any frivolities or deviations from the general standard. As if there was a system like the Soviet Union, where dissent and freedom were suppressed. A 1,000 years of magical technologies and no progress. Look how much content and things people have created in the last 50 years. And all that remains of the kingdom are buildings. There are tens of thousands of Roman-style buildings around the world, but only a few dozen Gothic cathedrals like the one in Cologne and Notre Dame in Paris. And they look oppressive. Their architecture is inhuman, weighing on the psyche. It says, bow down before God. Most buildings in cities were built before the millennium, Roman style, and these buildings incorporate a huge number of diverse pagan elements that would not have been built during the millennium. Much of St. Petersburg is built in this pagan style. It's also worth remembering that thousands of buildings from the Old World were destroyed in the 19th and 20th centuries. They simply didn't fit into the historical narrative, and it seems they contained sacred elements capable of providing answers. The most famous sites are the US World's Fairs, Louisiana, and Chicago. And of course, the bombing of Europe in the 20th century as part of Operation Millennium. The mocking name Millennium conceals the destruction of historical evidence that the millennial kingdom already existed. Let's return to the person of Christ. Yahweh came to spiritual people and redirected history in his direction, dictating his will to them. Jesus is a spiritual figure who came to save the world from the demiurge. But Yahweh, from early childhood, presented himself to Jesus as his father and began to mislead him, creating a close-minded fanatic. Jesus had no friends or peers to whom he could speak. Then perhaps Jesus recruited his apostles not by choice, but at Yahweh's request. Ultimately, we see that Christ's disciples were ordinary, illiterate laborers, whose backgrounds we know nothing about. Did they even have a spiritual inclination? And then Jesus speaks to them in parables, as if they were children, constantly using analogies, and yet he often encounters misunderstandings. O foolish and slow of heart. Luke 24:25. How long shall I be with you? Matthew 17:17. And the famous, "Get behind me, Satan," addressed to Peter. In this context, the following is interesting. What if Jesus had remained independent and recruited the most intelligent people, with great authority and power, from among the high priests and government officials, so that they could exert greater influence on the masses? What if they had been full-fledged members of society, with families and a spiritual background, and later, even centuries later, this would have played a very positive role in Christianity? Christianity would have had a different coloring. It would have been considered the religion of the most intelligent and advanced. And here, in comparison, the story of Krishna as a statesman is interesting. He was an independent, influential ruler, philosopher. He did not command others to follow him, but he communicated with the best representatives of the country and gave them valuable instructions. He was not a demanding dictator. He was a friend and advisor. However, Christ had the strength to express everything in the Sermon on the Mount, which is directed against the Old Testament. After this, Yahweh sent Christ to his death in Ritual 33, the Masonic number. Christ agreed and thereby acknowledged Yahweh's authority over himself. His last phrase on the cross is also telling. Father, why have you forsaken me? And after the resurrection, there were strange moments. For me, if Christ had come to visit me, I would have felt him behind my back. But when Jesus comes to the disciples, no one recognizes him. He proved to them that he was he. Thomas did not believe until he felt the wounds on Christ's body. Hence the expression about doubting Thomas. Angels also appeared and said, Yes, yes, this is Jesus. We confirm. Acts 1:10-11. And as they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men in white apparel stood by them, saying, Men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner, as ye have seen him go into heaven. And so, the apostles, wandering about, completed the teachings that Yahweh dictated to them through angels and visions. Where Jesus was all this time and how he was manipulated is a mystery. However, we then see Armageddon coming in 66. Cities and mountains melted, hundreds of thousands killed. It doesn't quite fit with the idea of turning the other cheek. Therefore, the conclusion is that Yahweh is turning Christ to the dark side, using his spiritual power to continue ruling, and the entire prophecy about the little season of Satan is Yahweh's plan to reign supreme here once again. And the arriving spiritual beings fall into the trap of ignorance, when the entire world is a vast, multi-layered matrix of lies. God wouldn't condone evil by arranging a little season of Satan, where billions of beings are kept in complete ignorance for hundreds of years, where their brains are washed from an early age and their bodies polluted with chemicals and microplastics, so that they don't understand a thing. At the same time, people don't have a single chance to resist Satan. People are forced to work 3 jobs for a crust of bread, and most don't have a minute of free time to figure it all out. It's like letting a T-Rex into a chicken coop. The elites need to practice the method of disclosure when they report the truth about the universe in films, and perhaps the famous Star Wars is not such a simple picture. The film Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith. The story in Star Wars about Anakin Skywalker is the story of Christ. Skywalker means one who walks in the sky. He was supposed to be the chosen one, but he went to the dark side and became Darth Vader.
Ты был избранником! Предрекали, что ты уничтожишь ситхов, а не примкнешь к ним!
A pawn of Palpatine, Yahweh, to build an empire enslaving the peoples of the galaxy. The symbol of the Empire in Star Wars is a 6-pointed star. The symbol of the rebels is an 8-pointed star, like the Star of Bethlehem. Rebels, Luke Skywalker, a new generation of Jedi who defeated a tyrannical empire that melted cities from orbit. The Star of Bethlehem is like a symbol of the Absolute, and the 6-pointed star is a symbol of the Demiurge, an imperfect star. Senator Palpatine pretended to be a good person, but turned out to be a Sith Lord. Just as Yahweh, posing as a god, is Satan himself. Anakin acknowledges Palpatine as a mentor and carries out Order 66, destroying the Jedi. And in our chronology, this is the year of Armageddon. Based on the material evidence of that time, we can conclude that Yahweh misled Christ and used his spiritual power to destroy civilizations that did not accept his insane rules. And then the Millennial Kingdom was built, which essentially represented the Soviet Union, a society of devoted fanatics with a cheap-as-now's view of the world. And medieval paintings reflect this childish worldview. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Christ ruled like a dictator, Darth Vader with a rod of iron, and the nations were forced to bow down under pain of death. Revelation 19:15, he rules them with a rod of iron. He treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of God Almighty. This is not the rule of God. It is the tyranny of the demiurge. Adam and Eve ate the fruits of the knowledge of good and evil. And people still do not distinguish between good and bad. People do not understand that the history of the Old Testament is the history of a demiurge who poses as God. The Absolute creates worlds, but acts indirectly. He won't come to the chosen ones. That's a violation of free will and extreme psychological pressure. The personality perishes under such contact. A person's true self will never be revealed. At the end of 1,000 years of rule, we see yet another series of strange, benevolent gestures toward people, where Satan is once again unleashed to deceive, rob, and murder millions, leading everyone into complete ignorance. And what have the saints been doing all these hundreds of years of the lesser season? Sitting in Jerusalem and watching as children and people are maimed. Isn't this condoning evil? A perfect system of lies. Yahweh uses the image of Christ as a control element, a clutched generation of saints. They blindly trust the apostles' writings about the necessity of Satan's lesser season. As above, so below. And here on earth it's the same duh. Masons appoint presidents, and people just as blindly trust these leaders, delegating authority to them. And all this is happening so that Satan can attack the camp of the saints, and then fire will descend upon the entire earth, destroying everyone. Then humanity will stand before the judgment seat at the white throne. And here's a question to ponder. Is all this really necessary? Is it necessary to destroy the earth again? First with a flood, now with fire. Or is this a new erasure of humanity and knowledge? Perhaps the demiurge's plan to mislead Christ has succeeded. The gospel clearly describes the apocalypse and Armageddon, and this doesn't fit with the turn-the-other-cheek approach. And again, at the end of the short season, everyone is destroyed. Satan, who cannot be defeated by human strength, is unleashed upon humanity, and then humanity is held accountable for Satan's deception. This is literally a repeat of the story of the fallen angels and the flood. The demiurge will have no power over people if their spirituality matures to the point where we understand that the Absolute is the foundation of all objects, and no one can control a conscious individual like the resurrected Christ, who conquered death itself. And so it would seem that we have reached a dark moment when we begin to understand that only another reset is destined for us. But I will allow myself to step back from the abyss and look toward the widening gap in the sky. I will try to show and present the true outcome of coming events in as positive a light as possible. The fact is that YouTube is now saturated with esotericists of all stripes, with thousands of channels in all languages, and this is an interesting sign. I believe many highly spiritual individuals have descended precisely in our time, at the end of the short season, to stop the impending catastrophe, another reset. But this time, under special conditions, spiritual abilities usually manifest at birth, where a child already demonstrates strength from an early age. The Gospel of Thomas says that Jesus, at age 5, made doves out of clay and brought them to life. It's also interesting to note that he cursed the children who mocked him, causing them to die. In other words, Jesus' abilities betrayed him, and Yahweh immediately took notice of him in his youth and began cultivating him, cultivating an ego and cult of personality. Ultimately, Jesus recognized him as his Father and obeyed him and his commands. Matthew 24:36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. This is a directed mission. Christ is unaware of Yahweh's plans, yet he follows them. In our time, however, embodied souls with great spiritual power are limited. Their abilities to control the material world are blocked until a special moment. That's why all esotericists feel a special inner state and promote their public personas online, where most of them spew complete nonsense about channeling, about life in space on other planets, about Ashtar Sharon, and other such nonsense. This stems from an unprocessed ego. Instead of objectively studying the world, they broadcast a false picture of the world imposed from the outside a matrix. And since we live in a lesser season, this lie is all around us. And here, a competition is underway among souls for an objective picture of the world's perception. Luke 17:21. The kingdom of God is within you. This is about everyone being part of the absolute. Yahweh knows full well that a horde of spiritual individuals will appear in the world, which is why a short season has been arranged, where lies are everywhere, and uncovering the truth requires enormous effort. However, the problem is that Yahweh cannot process everyone at once, as he did Christ, and no one has demonstrated the power to control the material world. Yahweh doesn't know who is truly the most powerful among them. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Hence, his entire tactic of clogging the information field with an endless supply of junk content. Even neural networks have become accessible to ordinary people for a reason. This has greatly increased the flow of this junk. But ultimately, the group that possesses the most objective picture of the world will emerge those who can see through these false layers of the matrix. They will be granted all their abilities to prevent the destruction of the earth. Over time, we build a structured picture of the universe in our consciousness, and what we pay attention to in life plays a role here. The most spiritual individuals, their consciousness is focused on the most energetically significant nodes, and they develop the most objective picture of what is happening. And who has the most objective picture of reality? That's right, the absolute, that is, by cognizing objective reality, and not the inner, simplistic world, the soul structurally approaches the spirit of the absolute. Therefore, spiritual individuals begin to control the material world, and their power can shake the throne of the demiurge. Yahweh's plan is to orchestrate some kind of chaos, where Satan is supposedly supposed to attack the camp of the saints and destroy the earth. The question is, why would Satan attack the camp if it would destroy it? Wouldn't it be easier for him to simply rule and not attack? The answer is already obvious to us. It's part of the Demiurge's plan. As I already said, the Bible is written in such a peculiar, distorted language as to disable normal perception and critical thinking, where every page is difficult and overloads the brain. So when the climax approaches and Yahweh's hand reaches for the button labeled fire, his playful little hand will be seized by the wrist by the most conscious souls, those who surpass him in spiritual strength, those who have most fully uncovered the Demiurge's plan and have come closest to the Absolute in spirit. And then Yahweh will be held accountable, along with all his puppets. It seems to me it's no wonder that all those in power behave so freely, while the US president laughingly declares he has no plans to go to heaven. They know they obey the Demiurge, and nothing will happen to them. But imagine their faces when Yahweh falls into the lower worlds, and they along with him. And humanity will finally be able to live normally, without demons, Nephilim, and other filth. An objective, authentic picture of the universe will be accessible to everyone, where the Absolute is the foundation of everything, where each person will be granted abilities in proportion to their awareness. A free world without dogma, without prophecies, and without false gods.